It is great to be here. Savannah's a town that I love. I love when I come into an airport and I say, I've been here before. I recognize this airport. This is a terrific little piece. I assume this was printed out on a 3D printer. That everybody's hashtag will be the first thing they print out. That will be really a lot of fun. Thank you for that nice introduction. Just to show you what an immigrant I am, because I'm not a native, I'm an immigrant. I was in India. I have this new book coming out, and I said to my publisher, can you get flyers for this book? I said, oh, of course. And we got the flyers, but they had a lot of trouble getting the flyers, and it was a problem. They were going to stuff them in all the bags. When I got to India, no flyers, stuck in customs. And we said, well, too bad, too bad. And suddenly it hit me. We have this flyer electronically. Why don't we just send it out to everybody? Duh. That's the immigrant accent. Right? We should have thought of that a long time ago. So thank you all for showing up. I'm really pleased to be with you. I'm going to talk to you this morning about more or less the future of education as I see it emerging. And we have a session that's a follow-up, which is a really nice Q&A session where you can ask me very specific questions. Because I'm going to talk about technology, but only as part of a much broader context. And I hope that will be of some interest to you. Now, let me begin with what I think is hopefully on all your minds. If you happen to get up and look at the news this morning, it was not very pleasant in Brussels. There were explosions at the airports and in the subways. And the reason I say this is because we have to remember that technology is a double-edged sword. I mean, bombs blow up, bombs are technology. Lots of things. Technology can work for us and it can work against us. And we have to be very careful that we try to make it support what we are trying to do and the goals that we have, and not let it get out of hand or mask, as it sometimes does, some of the goals that we have. This also might be on your mind. And the first thing they did on the TV this morning was talk to Mr. Trump. And I'm not a Trump supporter particularly. Maybe some of you are. But here's an interesting thing that I want to share with you that some of you may have seen. When they were trying to figure out who is voting for Trump, one researcher took a very different approach. He said, I'm going to look and ask a lot of people about their parenting style. Do you parent to teach your kid to have respect for elders or independence? Do you want your kid to be obedient or self-reliant? Do you want your kid to have good manners, or do you want your kid to be curious? Do you want your kid to be well-behaved, or do you care less about how they're behaved as long as they're considerate of others? And these are two different styles of parenting. What he found was that the first set, which he deemed, and these are not my words, but he deemed authoritarian, turned out to be correlated very, very highly, more than almost anything else, with Trump voters. And so I think these things that are on the right here are what we're going to need and what our kids are going to need for the future. So I hope that we focus on this and less on this. But that's something that we have to think about as we go forward. Now, this guy, born roughly this year, right, we all know, we've all seen pictures like that. How much will his world have changed in 20 years? Remember, he's going to graduate from college in 20 years from now. How much will that world have changed? And that's the kind of thing we need to think about as we're in education, because some of you may have seen the charts like this. This is a chart of world population, and it has the long ramp take off over thousands of years, and then all of a sudden, zoom, it goes almost vertically. And that's what's happened to population, but it's also what's happened if you read Kurzweil and other people with technology. Long ramp up, and now it's taking off, and we are on that rapid part of the curve. And that's very important because in the remainder of the 21st century and beyond that, what we call education, I think, is going to become very different. And I'm going to talk about how. I think it will have better ends, better means, better curriculum, better teaching, and a better use of technology. So we'll get to all of those things. I think it'll go from sending your kid to attend a great school, whether it's a K-12 school or a college, to having your kid have what I call an apprenticeship to the world. This is a different way to look at education. Because, you all know how we live in a very rapidly evolving place. You may have noticed that volatility is up, uncertainty is up, complexity is up, and seriously up, and ambiguity is up. Right? We now need terms like frenemy and competition. And many of you may have heard the term for this, which is VUCA. And that's a term that's now used widely. It started in the military, it's used in business, but we all live with a lot of VUCA. And we live with accelerating change, with the emphasis not on the change, because everybody knows about that, but the emphasis on the acceleration, that the change is happening faster and faster and faster, and that's something that human beings have never gone through. So we're trying to figure out how to adapt to this. And in this VUCA world and fast-changing world and accelerating changing world, what do we ask of our kids? Academic achievement, success in the current system, knowledge of those subjects, college readiness. Same thing that we've asked them for a very long time. And it's not just in some of the schools. This is the mission statement. I won't even tell you the name of the school. I thought it was the most expensive school in the world in terms of tuition until I found out that there was one even more expensive. But we will graduate students who are accomplished in the academic skills one would expect. Right? That's what it's really about. The rest is, okay, we want to do all these other things too, blah, blah, blah. But we're really still focused on the academic skills. What I think we want to ask of our kids of tomorrow is different. It's to improve their world. And that's where education is headed. How many of you, any of you from international baccalaureate schools, IB schools, do you have that? Okay, a few of you are. What's interesting, I just spoke to them in India, to their Asian Pacific conference, and I went back, and how many of you know the Wayback Machine? You all should know the Wayback Machine, right? That's how you find out what a website looked like in the past, because it keeps taking snapshots, and it's got billions and billions of screens. And I went back on the Wayback Machine to see what they said 10 years ago. And 10 years ago, the IB was talking about education for life. But after that, they switched, and now they talk about education for a better world. And they say that at our heart, we're motivated by a mission to create a better world through education. So I think that's the way the world is going. And it's moving from individual achievement, individuals, grades, rankings, personal success, the single person taking the test by him or herself, to accomplishment, which is something you do for the world, where it's in teams, that's projects, and it's real world. That's where I think things are going. And why? Because that's what we need. If you look at Google's site, what do they say they're looking for? Smart, team-oriented people who can get things done. And right now, our education and our schools are not about getting things done. They're about something different. They're typically about learning. So we've always wanted to improve the world. I don't think anybody hasn't wanted to improve the world through education, but we've done it differently. And I'm sorry this is cut off, but this is the paradigm we have been using up till now. We started with kids and we put them together with content. Right? You all know about content. Hopefully producing learning about that content, which led to, hopefully, improved people, mostly intellectually, because that's the kind of content we focus on. And then we bet that those people, maybe someday, when we finished with them, when they got out of school, when they finally got jobs, would improve the world. Oh, even better. Thank you. Well, that paradigm is changing. That's what's changing. And this is how I see what's happening. And when I say I see it, I don't mean that I just see it in my head. I see it in examples that are emerging all over the world. So I'm talking about an emerging new system of education, which starts with kids and real problems, local problems, world problems. Kids see these problems and they find solutions to those problems, real world solutions. And don't just write a report, but they implement those solutions. And I'll give you some examples later. What that means is that they, while they're students, improve their world. The world gets better as a result of what students do while they're in school. And the great benefit of that is that now those people will know how to do that. So they will be empowered people to improve the world forever. And that's a really different paradigm of education. What we are moving towards is real-world accomplishment. And the kids are doing it, they want to do it, and they're capable of doing it. And that's what's different about now as opposed to the past. What they need from us to do that is help in applying their passion, whatever they're passionate about, to improving the world. They need our respect and our trust. That's the most important thing. That's the number one thing kids ask me for all over the world. They need independence, and most of all, they need for us to believe in them. And this is one of my favorite teachers, Esther Wojcicki, who has a student named James Franco, who some of you may know because he's a well-known actor. And here's what he says. She showed me I could take my dreams as seriously as I wanted. That's what education needs to be about. It isn't about content. It isn't about the things that we'll talk about and the things that we do today. But we come from an old tradition, right? The academic tradition. It's a great tradition. There's no question about it. But really, when you think about it, or when I thought about it, I suddenly realized there are actually two great traditions of education in the world, not just one. The first one is actually the accomplishment tradition. It's the oldest tradition. It's a tradition of action and knowing people and working with people, relationships and accomplishment. It's the tradition of apprenticeship and father to son and mother to daughter, mother to son, father to daughter. That's the one hand. And then there's a second tradition, which came from various individuals who wanted to answer particular intellectual questions, whether they were about the meaning of life or God, or whether they were about the way the world works. And they formed the academic tradition. They got together in universities and academia and academic settings, and they were mostly about thinking. Now, here's the interesting thing. The accomplishment tradition didn't go into our schools, it went into our businesses. The academic tradition went into our schools. In fact, you could say they captured our schools. So often, people need two educations. They get an academic education, then they go to business, and they discover they need action, relationships, and accomplishment, so they start over and get a new education. And that's so inefficient and so out of sync with the way the world works today that we're going to have to put those two traditions back together. And I see that happening. That's the big trend that I see that's happening in the world. Now, kids have always learned more and been most motivated when they were doing real projects in the real world for real audiences that prepare them for the world that they're going to live in for the rest of their life. And now, with the world at our fingertips, thank you, Mr. Gates, our kids are no longer the same people that we were when we were in school. And that's really important because we tend to see the world through our eyes when we were younger. Now what we have, instead of little us's, we have people with extended brains. As soon as you have, or extended minds, as soon as you have this in your hand, your mind is extended. You can do all sorts of things and calculations and look up things and do things that you really couldn't do before. And that's not even the most powerful thing. Because the most powerful thing is that those extended brains are all networked together. And that puts us into a very, very different place than we ever were before. It empowers our kids enormously. So the kids are empowered, they can do stuff, they know they can do stuff, not everybody equally, not everybody has the same devices, but they are all part of this new empowered world. And they know it. They can do infinitely more. They can collaborate in totally new ways. They're empowered to do all these things, which I won't read to you, but you can read for yourself, in new and better ways. And that's really important and different. So, for example, we have primary school kids mapping the brain with EyeWire. How many of you have seen EyeWire? It's a game literally to map the connectome of the brain. If you haven't been doing it, the kids should do it. You can do it in primary school. It's a lot of fun, actually. High school kids are building supercomputers. Any of you done this? Where you take all the old laptops you can possibly find and you wire them together. The instructions are on the internet, and you build a supercomputer in your school. Kids are doing this on their own. 12-year-olds 3D printing custom prosthetic hands. And not only just printing the hands, which is nice, that's the maker movement, but they go on the internet to find other kids who need hands. And then they give them to them. They custom make them for those people. This is middle school girls. 9-year-olds, their community in Nebraska needed a new water park, and they put out an RFP. And the kids responded in the 4th grade. And their ideas became part of the eventual project because they were the ones who knew most about what kids want in a water park. 11-year-olds doing environmental reports. The idea is not to just do an environmental report, but to, when the government wants one, you don't go hire consultants, you hire your 6th graders. And they do it, and they submit it, and they learn how to do this. This is what kids can do these days. An 11-year-old is one of the world's top cryptographers. High school kids are testing local water quality. This was great. This was in San Diego, where they used to test the water, which is actually very important because of changes that come with rainfall, but they ran out of money in California. So they had all this beautiful equipment, but nobody to run it because they fired all those people. Well, some high school kids realized, why don't we do this? We can learn to use that equipment, and they started monitoring the water. Now, here's the funny part. Because they weren't officially hired by the government and they were kids, the government wouldn't accept their data. So what did they do? They just published it online. And everybody else who wanted the data got to use it. They're restoring our heritage. There are a lot of things that we would love to preserve and restore that we can't afford to. Kids can do this in wooden sailing ships, other kinds of things. And they're starting companies. Ryan's well. Ryan was a 6th grader in 1st grade when he heard they needed wells in Africa. He started a not-for-profit. They've dug thousands of wells. Color My World is a kid who went to Outback Steakhouse, saw them give out the crayons and to the little kids while they're waiting for their food. And he said, what do you do with the crayons when we're done? They say, we just throw them away. He said, that's a big waste. So he started a company to collect crayons, and they collect them from all these restaurants, and they sanitize them, and they redistribute to people who need crayons. And this is what kids are doing all over the place. This is where they are going even without us. So infrastructure, historic preservation, healthcare, helping government and peers. And to serve these kids, we need to really change what education is all about and what it should be. It's not anymore an academic process. That's what it's been up till now. It can't be that in the future, or just that in the future. We need to take these empowered kids that we know we already have and empower them further. And that's why you're a great audience to hear this, because you are the people who are going to help do that. But everybody, all our teachers, all our schools, all our education need to empower the kids further to use their new abilities to add value to the world, to their personal communities, to their local communities, to their global communities. Do it through real world accomplishment. Projects that really make a difference in the world that kids can point to and say, you see that? See that? That's better. I and my team did that. That's what we need to do. Not I wrote a report, or I learned something, or I did this. Education is going to be about I and my team did that. We do a little bit of this. We have service projects in some schools. How many of your schools have service projects? Well, not that many. Or long-term projects or things. We're starting to see more projects. Project-based learning is something that's coming to the schools. It's not real world yet. Most of those projects are just made up, but they are going to become real world. We need to do much, much more of this stuff, because we're headed towards an education that's based on real world accomplishment at its core. And all the other parts, all the STEM subjects and the humanities and the arts and the kinds of thinking and action relationships we need, support the projects. And people learn as they do the projects, but it's the improving the world that really matters. That's what the kids need to succeed. And even in the 19th century, Thomas Carlyle, a Scottish philosopher, realized that nothing builds self-confidence and esteem like accomplishment. So there's a real good reason to do that. And the other good reason is that's what we need. That's what Google and all these other companies are going. When you hear, oh, we want people who can think critically, who can do this, what they really want is people who can get things done. So if we don't do this, which we mostly don't today, we're really shortchanging ourselves and shortchanging our kids, because we deeply underestimate what they are capable of doing and the value that young people can now add to the world. Academic education just isn't enough anymore. It's okay, but it's not enough, because it underestimates what the kids are capable of doing. And I would guess, how many of you agree with that? I'm just curious. Okay, so many of you see that the kids can do much, much more than we are asking of them. They see it, and we have to figure out an education that does this. And it's a fundamental error to think that if we just improve what we do on the margins, add a few 21st century skills, add a few tablets, add a little more technology, that that's going to change anything, that will make it all well. No, we have to do something more fundamental. So let me talk about a different perspective on education. An education that goes beyond academics. It goes to better their world. This is what we talk about. Academics, plan A. Better their world, plan B. It's just an easy shorthand to use. And we'll talk about all these 5 components of what makes this education really different than the education of today. First one is the goal, the ends of education. It used to be, and still is in most places, about personal achievement. We want each kid to be the best they can be or to get the best grades or do this. That's not the way the world works anymore. The world works in teams, but the reason we educate our kids is to have a better world. That's why. Otherwise, why would we bother doing it? And what we want them to do is not just learn. Learning is fine, but learning is a means. We want them to become good people, effective people, world-improving people. So we're moving from learning to becoming in the world. Learning is a means, but it's not the goal of education. The goal of education is bettering their world and becoming good, effective, world-improving people. That's who we want to produce, and that's what we should measure. Although we don't, but we will. So that's the ends of education. They're different. Now, the means has to change in order to support those ends. And the means goes beyond what we do in the past, either lecturing or discussion or testing, all the things that we traditionally do, and there's more than just those things, there's projects, there's other things, to real world accomplishment. If you haven't done something that made the world better, you haven't really had an education. If you haven't learned that you can make the world better, you haven't really had an education. We need real-world projects that solve real-world problems. Right now, when we give kids problems or projects, they're almost all made up. We say, oh, this would be a great one because we can check off all these different standards. But that's not what we need to do. We need to have them go out and see what the real world looks like, see what they identify as problems in this world, and this can happen even with our smallest kids. They can say, oh, you know, our neighborhood's a little dirty in some places, or whatever else it is, and they can fix those problems. They need to really see, and we have to help them do this, the needs of the world. It's not the needs of the individual anymore. It's the needs of the world. And we have to do it through applied passion. Passion is huge. How many of you are thinking about student passion? Yeah, because we're now talking about passion-based education and passion-based learning. But that's not what's important. It's important, certainly, for kids to understand what their passion is. That's very important. In fact, knowing what your passion is probably one of the most important things you can get out of school. But along with that, you need to learn how to apply that passion. Because if you don't, if you just like something, that's not enough. You have to be able to take that and use that to do something that improves the world. And if you do that, and here's the great news about this stuff, you don't just come out with a transcript of grades or a 4.0 average or whatever your average is. You come out with a resume of real world accomplishments. Now imagine showing up either at a college place or at a workplace and saying, here's my resume. Here's my resume. You're looking for marketing people? I've done marketing on 20 projects. You're looking for this? I've done this. I've already learned how to do projects and improve the world. We're going to have much, much better workers, much, much better people in college, because college is a wonderful place if you know what you want to do. If you know what you want to do when you go to college, college is phenomenal. They can teach you all the depth that you could possibly need. If you show up in college and you have no idea, you're going to have a tough time. So we have to help our kids become, this is a word of a friend of mine, Zoe Weil, wonderful person, just wrote a new book, and she talks about solutionaries. And that means people who find solutions to real world problems. And our kids are doing this. There are databases, and I'm trying to create them, of the real world projects. And there are hundreds and thousands of these projects that kids have already done, some in school, some out of school. But we want you to have this information so you can say, this would be a good project for this particular kid. This would be a fabulous thing to try. Nobody's done this before. People can add to these things. Because we want to make our kids more powerful. We don't want them to know stuff that people had to know in the past. Obviously, kids need to know stuff. We all do. But it's very much a function of who we are and what we do. So let's talk about the kind of curriculum that we have. And I think what we need, and I've thought about this a lot, and I've written a book called The World Needs a New Curriculum. Now, what kind of curriculum do we have today? We have a curriculum that's based on what I call the mess. Math, English, science, and social studies. Right? There's a few things, there may be arts, there may be a few other things that are added to it, but if you had to cut out stuff, you wouldn't cut out the mess. So we have this curriculum, but we want to get away from that because that's not everybody needs the mess. Some people need some of it, obviously, but not everybody needs all of it in the same way we give it to them today. What they all do need is effective thinking, effective action, effective relationships, and effective accomplishment. Everybody needs that to the greatest extent they possibly could have it. And if they have that, if they have skills where they can do those four things, they're going to succeed. Doesn't matter what the world turns into. Subjects are needed, different amounts by different people. Generalized skills, and I'll talk about what those skills are needed as much as possible by everyone. So we're seeing some move to a skills-based curriculum, but I think we need to go much, much further. Because in terms of the skills we teach today, one of the things that I realized, and I don't think everybody realizes, we are extremely narrow in our curriculum. It seems like we're broad because we never get it done. We never have time to do it all. But really, what are we teaching? We're teaching reading and math, mathematical thinking and understanding, more advanced written communications and writing and research, and if we're lucky, critical thinking and scientific thinking and maybe a little citizenship. That's it. But here's the kind of skills that kids really need. It's a huge list. It's a big list. And because you can't possibly read that list, because I had to make it in small type so it would fit on one page, I'm going to go through them. I'm going to go through them one by one. And what I'd like you to think about as I do is this important? Is this important enough to be part of our curriculum? Do we do it today? And for this audience particularly, how could technology help us do this better? Because that's what I think is really lacking to a large extent. So the thinking skills, problem solving. Okay, we're doing more of that these days. Curiosity, questioning, creative thinking. We hear about that from Ken Robinson and others. But design thinking is new. Integrative thinking is new. Systems thinking is new. Financial thinking is something we really don't do very much of. Inquiry, argument, judgment, which is maybe the most important underlying skill. Transfer, aesthetics, habits and biases of the mind. Some of you may know Daniel Kahneman's book where he talks about all the biases, thinking fast and slow, very important. Positive mindset of Carol Dweck. Stress control, focus, contemplation and meditation. And perhaps the most important thing that we alluded to before, self-knowledge of your own passions and strengths. Because if you don't know that, you really don't know what you're going to do, what you want to do, what you're good at, how you can help solve the problems that improve your world. But that's just the thinking side. Now the action side, which we do very little of today. The habits of highly effective people. How many of you have read that book, The 7 Habits? Hugely important. Hugely important. We don't teach them. How could we know the 7 habits of highly effective people and not teach all our kids? Agility, adaptability, leadership. But not just leadership, which we do a little bit, followership. Because we're not always going to be leaders. Many times we'll all be followers. Experimentation, decision-making under uncertainty, which is the real kind of decision-making that takes place in the world, prudent risk-taking, reality testing and feedback, patience, resilience, grit. See, there is a singular of grit. But the work of Angela Duckworth and other people is really important in this. Entrepreneurship, innovation, improvisation, ingenuity, strategy and tactics, breaking barriers, project management, because everything's going to be projects, programming machines, which we're finally getting around to, video making. Video is the new text. It's really hard and different to make videos than to do writing. I've learned that the hard way. Innovating with all the future technologies that are coming down, whether it's the 3D virtual reality goggles, whether it's Google Glass, whether it's Siri, whether it's AI, all these things, the kids have to learn how to interact and innovate with these things. But that's just thinking and action. Now we have relationship skills, collaborating and communicating. We do one-on-one reasonably well, perhaps, but in teams, in communities, in families, at work, online, in virtual worlds, with machines, right? That's who we're going to have to communicate with, machines. That's a lot of what you do in IT. Listening, networking, relationship building, empathy, courage, compassion, tolerance, ethics, politics, conflict resolution. We want a more peaceful world, we'd better teach conflict resolution, negotiation, peer-to-peer, coaching, and being coached. Should any of these not be part of our curriculum? Any of these things that we wouldn't want our kids to really know about? Well, we can't do this as teaching everything. There may not be time to do all of that stuff, but we can figure out a new way to do a curriculum as supporting. We can use technology to do this. We're working with this so that when a kid needs any of these skills and a kid is doing a project, then you can say, go learn more about project management. It's right there. It's online. It's set up in a new, very fractal way where here's the most important thing, here's the next most important things. And that's going to be one of the new things that we do. No more linear content where you start with chapter 1 and get to the end. So we need to not learn the subjects as much as learn the skills as the projects require them. And all the projects that we have require all those skills to one degree or another. And we can check those off, like now we check off the Common Core skills that we want kids to know. It requires a different kind of teaching. Right? Now teaching, and I've heard this from people who go into teaching after they've been in industry, and what are they told on the first day? Your job is to deliver content. Okay? The rest of it, nice, do it, do whatever you want. Your job, and then this is a guy who took a math teaching job, and that's what he told me they told him. We're going to have to switch from coaching to coaching and empowerment, empowering our kids. That's what our kids want. They should come in and say, I want to do this, and we say, we can help you. That's what we're here for. We're not here to teach you the mess, because most of that isn't going to help you. We're here to empower you to become a good, effective, world-improving person. And that brings me to the technology part. Most of what we do today with technology is doing old things in new ways. And you know what? That is trivial. It's not that it's useless, it's just not very valuable. We need to do new and powerful things that empower the kids. So, for example, if what you're doing, or your people are doing, or your teachers are doing, or is searching, or writing, or research, or calculating, or watching videos, that's nothing new. There's no great value in that because we could do all those things before. We could do writing and we could do research. Now that we do them online, it's kind of like saying, okay, I have this incredibly powerful cell phone. I'm going to use it to make phone calls. Right? Okay. We could make phone calls before on landlines. We could do that stuff before. This can do so much more. And so that's what it's really important to focus on. What's different? Real-time connection, Skyping and tweeting, creating apps. And every class can create an app. Complex analyses, simulation, making videos, not watching videos, but making them. Robotics, all those are the new things in the world. There's a great story about 3 teenagers in Decatur, which is not that far from here, outside Atlanta, who had the cops showed up at their house one night. And in the first 5 minutes, they realized it was a mistake. They shouldn't have been there. There was no need, anything. But the cops decided, well, since they were there, they put the whole family, the father and the mother and the 3 kids, through the process of looking them up on the computer and finding out if they had records and doing all this kind of stuff. And guess what? They felt harassed. So what did the kids do? These are kids who were 16, 15, 14, who had taken some online courses in programming on their own. They built an app to rate the police. Now there is an app called 5.0 where you can rate every encounter that you have with the police. It then collates these. You can compare your community's behavior with other communities' behavior. It's kind of like Yelp for rating your police, and that's what they based it on. And so they made this thing. It's on the Google Play Store, and what's wonderful about it is that all the comments, some of the comments say, great, good idea, but a lot of the comments say, here's how you make it better. Here's how you make it better. Here's how you make it better. So this is what young people are able to do on their own with the powerful uses of information technology. And that's where you should be focusing your efforts, in my opinion. It's education to better their world. It doesn't better your world if you write a paper by hand or on the computer. Who cares? So that new kind of education, my sense is it's starting to emerge in our best schools, in individuals, in our best teachers. It's really just pockets of it are growing up around the world. I'm sure in some of your places with the new matrix with real-world accomplishment at the center. Doesn't mean we have to remove the mess totally, because we won't. But we have to learn to individualize it. Not everybody needs calculus or advanced algebra or even algebra. We have to find out who does and why and give it to them as they need it. Kids will learn anything if they need it to accomplish something that they think is worthwhile. That's the motivation for kids. And that goes even to reading. We don't need to teach kids to read. We need to give kids reasons to teach themselves to read. And then we can help them. But they have to be motivated by something that they want to do. So we don't need more classes and all this stuff. We need to figure out ways to give them all those skills that I showed you as needed. And more people are realizing that we have to do this, that we need this kind of an education, a Plan B education, an education to better the world. Not all the parents realize it, or even all the teachers, or even all the communities, but we have to help them figure it out, because that's the way the world is going. We need to experiment, because we don't know how to do this. This is a new world we're living in. We just have these old traditions that we know are not working as well anymore. Now, some of you may have come across this particular parent. He seems to be everywhere. Don't experiment with my kid. And I've heard this from people who I think should know a lot better. Parents get scared. I'm a parent. Do I really not want him to have all that mess that everybody had? Well, the answer is we'd better try new things. We have to, because it would be irresponsible not to experiment. We live in a world that's never before been seen. Our kids especially are going to live in this world. It's very different than the world we grew up in. That's the typewriter I used in college 50 years ago. Kids wouldn't even know what that machine is. We don't know how to prepare our kids for this world. We're just figuring it out. And so we have to all experiment together to create an education. And we want that education to be better for the kids, and we want it to be better for all of us. And I think Plan B, education to better their world, is better for the kids because it gives them what they need: independence, applied passion, a strong resume of accomplishments, and a strong sense of how they fit into the future world. But it also helps us because it liberates all this opportunity, all this power that kids have to improve the world, which didn't exist before. And when you think about it, we used to keep our women from doing a lot of things that are useful in the world. And now, especially in our society, we don't do that anymore. Well, that's half our people. Now, if you turn it on its side, half the people in the world are under the age of 25. If we keep those people from contributing, now that they can, we are losing this huge amount of value that they can add to the world. So today we're on the ground floor of something very, very new and different. It's going to be full of imagination. It's going to be full of creativity. That's a 747 turned into a home. Full of innovation and full of entrepreneurial spirit. Right? And I'm a huge optimist about the future of education. And I hope all of you are optimistic about the future of education. The reason I am is because I look at the kids. I'm a huge optimist about today's kids. That's my kid in the center there, but I'm talking about all kids everywhere. They all are in this new world. They all are empowered or about to be empowered. They need an education that deeply combines the academic and the accomplishment traditions of education, not just thinking, which is important, of course, but action and relationships and accomplishment. They need to integrate what they're doing in their education into the local communities, and that's just starting to happen more. They need an education that empowers them further. That's what you really have to think about when you look at these kids. How can we empower you further with independence, with passion, with strong sense of accomplishment, and how you fit into your future world? And then finally, we have to help the parents who grew up, as many of us did, in a different world. And we have to help them understand how to support their kids that are now very different kids and very empowered kids. And that goes back to this parenting style that we talked about at the beginning. That's why this is so important. What we need in the future is independence and self-reliance and curiosity and consideration. Let that be a guide. So the education that we need, what I'm talking about, doesn't fully exist anywhere. I don't know of a single school in the world that does this 100% that I can point to, or a country. But a lot of people are moving in these directions. Finland is doing a lot more projects. The International Baccalaureate is doing a lot more projects. Individual schools are doing a lot more projects. So we can create this education. And as the people who are into technology and advanced thinking, you should be at the forefront of that. And as we do this, I like to ask people to remind themselves to keep in mind two words. The most important two words that any teacher or parent or anybody else can say to a kid these days. And I'll let you think for a second about what you think those two words are. These are mine. Surprise me. Because if you ask them to do that, they will. How many people think they will? Yeah, they will. So let's all work really hard to make our education about real-world accomplishment. Okay? These are my latest books. The World Needs a New Curriculum. You can get on Amazon. Education to Better Their World is coming out in July. This is Esther Wojcicki's book, my colleague. Moonshots in Education, definitely worth reading. And if you want to get these slides and review any of this material, and if you want to give me some feedback, send me an email at marcprensky@gmail.com. Thank you all.